Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about coaching, a key leadership capability. In our part of the world, in China and in Hong Kong, the time now is 4:30 p.m. I see that some of you are located in other time zones. So good afternoon, good evening, or even good morning to you. This is the beauty of the virtual presence, that we are able to connect with people all over the world. Very happy to see you all joining us today. So let's spend a couple of minutes just sharing a few points about who we are, what we do, and where we come from. Tor, why don't you begin?
Yeah, happy to do that, Thomas. And it is, of course, useful to know a little bit about who is speaking. I've had a long career as a management consultant, first as a partner with Accenture, later as a partner with McKinsey. And as such, I've served clients all over the world, in the Americas, in Africa, in Europe, and now recently in Asia. I'm based in Hong Kong. And I've also had the chance to work as a line leader within these organizations, founding new groups in various countries, recruiting people, building them up, building the team, building capabilities. So we had something interesting to bring to our clients. And so gradually over time, I became aware of coaching as a very important tool to help my people grow and develop. I found that it can help scale leadership and it can help us multiply what we're able to deliver. So that's part of my background. And so I chose to become a certified coach, and I've been working in quite a focused manner in this field for the past decade. Thomas.
Thank you, Tor, for sharing your journey. I started my career in Accenture Strategy Group, designing and implementing strategies for major companies within many industries concentrated in Scandinavia. And then I moved to China, heading up the commercial section at the Norwegian Consul General in Guangzhou. My last job before joining Agnus Consulting was as Managing Director China at Rainpower, a major Norwegian renewable energy firm. At that time, I faced some really difficult challenges, and I decided to engage an executive coach to help me develop my leadership capabilities in order to solve the challenges that I had at hand. My coach was Tor Mesoy, my co-speaker today. Tor helped me develop my self-awareness, improve how I relate to others, and also shifting some key mindsets, making me succeed much more as a leader. By that, I got fascinated about coaching and decided to join Agnus Consulting. Today, I'm working with business leaders to help them develop themselves and the people around them. And this is something I really feel is meaningful to do. These are our objectives for this webinar, what we aim to accomplish through this hour. By the end of the webinar, we aim for you to get a clear understanding of what coaching is and how it can help you lead in challenging times. We will share one powerful tool, the Leadership Circle Profile, which can be used to assess the effectiveness of a leader and a coach. And this webinar is not only about theories and frameworks. We really want to share with you some practical coaching techniques that you can apply in your work from tomorrow. In this webinar, we would like you to participate actively by doing a couple of exercises by annotating on the screen in Zoom. Now, many of you may already know how to do this, but here are some simple instructions so that we can ensure to have everybody with us when we do the exercises. So please follow me. Go to the top of your screen where it says View Options and click on Annotate. You will see then a line of buttons. Pick where it says Stamp, and then choose the heart. So as a small exercise, please annotate with your small heart within the big gray heart on the screen. Some of you may be watching this on a cell phone, in which case you may use the pen function to annotate on the screen.
Some people getting creative here. Good to see you online, Per. Cool.
Good. Thank you. So we would like to start with a small exercise for everybody to reflect a bit on what we mean when we talk about coaching. So below are some descriptions of what coaching could be about. Please apply the annotation function and stamp one or more of the descriptions below. What is coaching about? And feel free to annotate more than one description. So one piece of hint, not all of them are actually about coaching.
I'm delighted to see that we have no takers so far for fixing people through therapy sessions.
That was probably an easy one.
What shall we say, Thomas? What do you think of this way of scoring?
I think that we have different opinions on this. I think that's a good starting point. And maybe throughout the webinar, we will be able to address some of these points so that it becomes clearer what we mean when we talk about coaching.
Do we move on, or do you want to comment any further on the scores here? Move on?
I think, yeah, let's move on. We live in challenging times. The pandemic has fundamentally shifted the environment in which we live and work. The regulatory conditions have changed, consumer preferences, the nature of work, supply chains have been disrupted, and capital markets are responding in unpredictable ways. Many of you may be familiar with the term Wukai, stemming from strategic planning in the military. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Wukai is one way to describe the world that we are living in now and likely to be living in for some time going forward. What you see on this picture is a man rafting in rapid waters. Many of you may have probably tried it before. I've tried it a couple of times, and I find it very exciting and sometimes also a bit scary. You find yourself constantly trying to steer a boat while the water around you is so powerful and so unpredictable, with a strong will to push you to the side, flip you over, or smash you against rocks. You have very little control, but need to work with the water, not against it, in order to get where you want to be. I find it to be a very vivid analogy to the business environment that many companies find themselves in at the moment. So what does this mean for organizational leaders? It means that leaders will have to up their game, develop new capabilities, develop themselves in order to lead their organizations steadily in the shifting conditions of today's environment.
I agree entirely with that, Thomas, and I think my reflection here would be that when you're in relatively calm waters, you can just tell everyone to paddle, and it's relatively predictable, and a command and control approach to management works very well. But if you have to respond very dynamically to unforeseeable forces, then somehow leadership needs to be distributed. So the team needs to be stronger so they can act in the moment without having to refer to authority in the same way. So for the purposes of today's webinar, we will adopt this definition of coaching. And this is not the only truth, but we will consider that coaching is a process that aims to deepen awareness and improve performance. Coaching seeks to unlock a person's potential to maximize their contribution and to flourish. It's helping them to discover and learn rather than teaching them. And so we see here that in contrast to one of the proposed definitions earlier on, where we got a few heart marks, it's not really about teaching people so much. Teaching is valuable. Mentoring is valuable. Consulting, problem solving are all valuable. There's a time and a place for all those, but coaching is a bit distinct from that. We can teach people to build certain skills, perform certain acts based on best practices and so forth. When we are coaching, we're typically seeking a deeper kind of transformation where awareness grows. And it is both about their potential to maximize their contribution, which to me is a little bit of an organizational aspect, but it's also a personal thing to flourish. And so when we coach people, we feel very grateful. We feel honored that people will let us into their lives and share what's going on for them. And part of what makes it so meaningful is this strong belief that we can sometimes catalyze for people, sometimes nurture them to become more impactful, more successful where they are in a professional setting or in any organizational setting, but this has spillover effects to their personal and private lives also. We typically think of 3 different types of coaching. You can sometimes coach for execution. So I might coach someone on building good PowerPoint slides, so maybe we can think of this as a decent PowerPoint slide at least, and we can ask questions like, has the spell checking been done properly? Is the white space distributed? Is alignment systematic? Are the fonts systematic? Is the logic clear? So I can coach someone on a specific skill to execute something. I can also coach to build capabilities, and here it's not just about a specific skill or specific execution, but it's broader and perhaps deeper. So I might coach someone to build a more strategic perspective. Can they take a more global perspective? Can they take an enterprise-wide perspective and not be locked into their individual business unit or their individual country practice when they view the world? That's a different thing. It's not a specific act, it's not a specific task, but it's more building a perspective. And I can coach for leadership growth, helping people develop a greater complexity of mind so they're ready to engage in more complex tasks, more complex leadership challenges. Regardless of what form of coaching I'm engaged in, I may want to focus on a number of fairly fundamental aspects. So one is aligning expectations between coach and coachee. So the coachee, for example, is entirely confident that what is discussed will be kept confidential. Can also have clear expectations about how many sessions are we going to run, how long will the sessions be, and so forth. A lot of practicalities around this, so we provide a safe setting for the work. Another aspect that I may focus a lot on is paying magnificent attention, being fully present with the other person, not being distracted certainly by my phone, but also not being distracted by the thoughts about what I'm going to do after this meeting, or the thoughts of the fact that I might have quarreled with my spouse this morning, but being fully present with the person. And we believe that paying magnificent attention in this way actually affects the way the other person thinks. So they can think better and deeper than they would just on their own. It's quite useful to know your approach. Some people make it an open dialogue. Some people will focus a lot on silence and really give space to the other person to think out loud, speak out loud, think out loud, and be very conservative in terms of the contribution. There's a whole spectrum there, but knowing how you want to approach it is important. Trust is, of course, critical. We mentioned the confidentiality, but the trust goes way beyond that. It's trust, I think, in the fact that you come with goodwill, that you want what's best for the other person. You're not going to use information that comes out in the coaching conversation to make decisions about promotions or about salary adjustments or new job responsibilities and so forth without this being in consultation with the coachee. So you hold the other person, hopefully in unconditionally positive regard, you're fully present and you're there for the coachee. This is the coachee's time. We're so trained through our education and much of our training to focus on hard facts and the analytical aspects. When we coach, we also want to listen for emotions. So for example, if I ask the coachee to list a set of options that they might choose in a setting, then they may list those options, and when they describe one of them, there may be more energy in their voice. So if I can detect that and feed that back to them, as you listed the 3 options now, I heard that when you went through the second one, there was just a particular vibrancy. What's going on there? Say more about this. And the coaching may come to understand more about their own thinking. I think it's very valuable to use silence effectively and to be very comfortable with silence. If we ask an incisive question, a very open question, it can be based on our conversation so far, what is transpiring for you? We need to be very comfortable with the silence, and maybe that can last several minutes. You can typically tell whether the coachee is processing, thinking hard, or whether they're bored and disconnected. It's not so hard to tell. And as long as they are thinking and there's something interesting going on the other side, I would advocate for silence. We want to give feedback sometimes. First of all, we want to not co-mingle feedback and coaching. They are different things. But sometimes we want to reflect what we are seeing in a conversation. It seems that, as I asked you the previous question, you got quite tense. What's going on? Why does that question make you tense? That's a way of giving feedback in the moment. We want, for the most part, to ask open questions so that people can reflect openly and explore new possibilities. If we ask closed questions, we're typically curtailing the thinking. And finally, in collaboration with the coachee, we'll often want to prioritize at the end of the conversation. We may have touched on a whole set of topics. Can we help the coachee to prioritize? It's their job to prioritize, but we may bring it up and nudge them along so they walk away with something very concrete and they walk away with some specific actions. And if we do this well, our experience is that we can enhance execution, we can build new capabilities, and we can enhance leadership growth.
Now, it's time for our second exercise. So given what we have said about coaching so far, we would like you to reflect on your own leadership style, your own way of interacting with other people. To what extent are you applying coaching in your leadership? So please use annotation and indicate where on the scale you think you belong.
Seems we have a gathering of coaches here today. So clearly the participants here are making a conscious choice to engage in coaching, and I expect that's because the value of this is clear.
And we see that it varies quite a bit how much we apply coaching. Now that is, of course, something we can expand. We can expand our leadership repertoire, including applying more coaching. And hopefully this webinar will be one step in helping you doing that.
And I do absolutely find it natural that people are on different points on the spectrum here. Coaching is not everything. Instruction, teaching, giving clear commands can sometimes be appropriate. If we are in a crisis situation, that might not be the best situation to coach. Then you want to be very clear and give crisp orders until you're out of the crisis. And that's where some people are today.
One question many of you may ask is this one: how do I know if coaching works? That it actually brings positive changes to the individual teams and the wider organization. There are a number of ways in which we can assess the effect of coaching, from the more subjective to the more objective end of the scale. Firstly, the coachee may feel energized, empowered, supported, and challenged by the coach. I, for instance, found that I increased my self-awareness after I was coached by Tor. And the coachee may feel that the work she's doing becomes less draining, more motivating, and she may find more meaning in the work. We may choose to conduct a 360 assessment before and after a coaching journey and see clear improvements in how others perceive the leader. And we may see clear boost in the performance of the leader, leading to more promotions and more opportunities in the organization. And finally, the ultimate measure is when increased leadership effectiveness translates into clear improvements in the results of the organization. One of the most powerful tools to assess leadership capabilities and coaching effectiveness is the leadership circle profile. It is based on a comprehensive model for leadership development, unifying a lot of research on what factors affect leadership effectiveness and how a leader develops over time. Here you see a sample LCP for a leader. It has a lot of richness and detail, but let me unpack some of the major features for you. The leadership circle profile consists of an inner circle and an outer circle, describing how the leader scores along a number of dimensions. The black line shows how the leader views herself, whereas the green shaded area shows how others around her views her along that dimension. Let's focus on inner circle, as the outer circle is basically a detailed version of the same dimensions. The circle consists of a lower half circle and an upper half circle, representing two primary leadership domains. The lower half of the circle describes the leader's reactive tendencies. These are leadership styles emphasizing caution over creating results. These include complying, the focus on gaining the approval of others, protecting yourself from engaging with others, and controlling tendencies. The upper half describes the leader's creative competencies, including achieving, system awareness, authenticity, who you are and what you stand for, self-awareness, and relating, how you forge close relationships with the people around you. Now, if we look at this example for relating, for instance, the leader clearly thinks that he relates well with others, while others don't think he's particularly easy to relate with. And if we look at the opposite side, on controlling, others clearly sees him as a very controlling leader, while he does not think he is. There is a clear discrepancy here. Why is that? It opens up some interesting conversations. The LCP is a strength-based model. All dimensions are strengths, but as we develop and leaders, the dimensions on the reactive side may limit our leadership potential. So typically, we will work to reduce those dimensions and build the leadership competencies on the upper half side.
As Thomas indicated, sometimes an early assessment can be done with a leadership circle profile or some other instrument. There are lots of good instruments out there. Sometimes it can start out with the performance assessment that's being done in the company or in the organization. And sometimes the coaching journey can come simply because of a need, a desire, an aspiration that the coachee puts forward. or the presumptive coach he puts forward. Here are some examples where we often get engaged in coaching. I'm working with one senior leader now who has recently left one position in one organization and has chosen to leave before lining up his next job because he wants to take time out to think. He's confident that he can find another position, but he doesn't want to rush into the next thing, but really gain clarity on what the next chapter in life will be for him. It can be to develop or enhance a skill. Thomas mentioned this example of how he stepped into the shoes of the managing director role, and he had to develop a number of skills. So he wanted to develop a number of skills and mindsets in order to fill those shoes well. Sometimes it can be about increasing courage and determination, or increasing self-awareness, uncovering underlying assumptions and beliefs. And this often applies when someone comes and says, I am very clear on what I want to do, but I find that I struggle to do what I commit to. On the one hand, I commit to taking on more responsibility, or I commit to being more gracious with my people, being more nurturing, providing more mentoring. But then the daily stresses set in, and I find myself being completely task-oriented, and I forget about my people. And then I kind of wake up and I have a bad conscience, and I know I should be investing in my people, and I'm fully committed to doing so. But then the daily pressure set in again, and I don't manage to do it. So what is going on there when there's this conflict of interest between two demands that I'm facing? Often I need to shift the mindset to make that happen, and that may start with self-awareness. Sometimes it's about forming new habits or a new pattern of behavior. It might be about work-life balance. It might be about staying fit. It might be about really finding enough time for the family, and so forth. There are many, many ways to coach. And since we have so many experienced people on here, would love to hear from you in just a moment when we open up what approaches you are using. We wanted to make sure that if there was someone here who had limited experience, we cover at least one very simple approach. And this is the GROW model. Very often, we humans, when we arrive at some problem, some challenge, we focus very much on the problem, and we may bring the problem to someone else. And if we get into problem solving, we may be churning and analyzing and diagnosing the problem, and it can sometimes be not so energizing. It may be helpful, but maybe not so energizing. If we can start out by getting very clear on what the goal is, that can be just more exciting. It doesn't mean that we ignore the problem, but we start out by painting this, this golden future that we might want to arrive at. And then we might go to asking about the reality. So what is the distance between where we are now and what that goal is? And what might be the options to close that gap? It can sometimes be to make changes to the current reality, but it might also be to change the goal. Perhaps my goal is utterly unrealistic, and if I actually think through this, I may come to want to change my goal to something that's more attainable. Or on the other hand, maybe my goal is not ambitious enough, given my gifting and my talents and my skills and my track record. Maybe I want to aim for something higher. And coaching can help bring some alignment there. And finally, we want to be clear on what the way forward is. What option is chosen? What do you commit to? Who's going to hold you accountable? So very simple mnemonic here, a very simple process. It is not linear, of course, but as a starting point, it can be helpful. We've also provided some of the typical open questions that we would ask in each of the 4 areas here. What do you want to achieve? What would your future look like if this was achieved? What would the benefits be? And on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is this to you? Are you really committed to achieving this goal? And then on reality, what's happening at this moment that makes this an issue for you? What beliefs and assumptions do you have? Maybe about the present, maybe about the opportunity to reach the goal. And how are these beliefs or assumptions serving you or not serving you? We often walk around with blind spots and limiting assumptions that may be partially true or sometimes not true at all. And so if we reflect deeply on them and run some experiments, we can get a better calibration with reality and hence make better choices. In the option space, what are some different things you might do to achieve your goal, or at least to make a step towards the goal? What have you used in other situations? And how will you evaluate these options so that you can prioritize? Maybe in the wrap up, what's one thing that you will do? At least one thing. And by when will you have done it? Some accountability there, so it becomes concrete and specific. And who will hold you accountable? We typically encourage the coachee to find a different accountability partner so the coach doesn't become too enmeshed in the situation. Sometimes the coach can be the accountability partner. It's better if they find someone else. But we want to make sure as coaches that they have someone if they believe that can be helpful. Thomas.
Yes. So there is a lot of great resources out there if you want to know more about coaching and leadership. And the following is just a small selection. There are some great books. The Tao of Coaching is a classic book about coaching, collecting a number of great techniques for you to try out. I noticed there was a question in the chat box about the book that underlies the LCP. Mastering Leadership and Scaling Leadership are two books written by the people that founded LCP, and they both describe the unified leadership model and how leadership development is based on how we develop as adults. Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps, How to Thrive in the Complexity is a book describing some common traps that our minds tend to fall into and what we can do to avoid them. YouTube is a wonderful place to look for great knowledge and insights. Here are two models. The iceberg model and immunity to change model are two different ways to help you shift your mindset and with that become more effective leaders. So let us recap a bit. In this webinar, we have introduced coaching. We have shared some principles of coaching and also showed one powerful model, the LCP. We have explained some of the areas that coaching can be used to enhance, shared some simple questions that you can start applying, and pointed to some additional resources for you to dig deeper if you are curious. Now, we strongly believe that you can greatly empower your team and organization by applying more coaching in your work. So we will then end by asking you one question. What will you do differently from tomorrow?
And we're really keen to hear your answers to that, but we also want to make this a two-way street, and so we are also very open to questions from you, which you can post in the chat, and I think Jennifer will open up so people are unmuted, and we can also do it real time. There are few enough participants that it should be possible to have people engage directly. Jennifer, up to you to moderate now.
Yes, thank you so much, Thor and Thomas, for giving us the overview on coaching and how it can help with leadership and creativity. We are now open for questions. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat box. But if you prefer to ask the question, you can unmute your microphone now and ask your question verbally. Okay, perhaps I can ask the first question then. So I'm wondering on my side, is there a difference between mentoring and coaching?
Thomas, do you want to field that one?
There are similar roles, but we tend to say that mentoring is more about sharing your experience and past practices, best practices. Whereas coaching for us is more about asking questions for the coachee to discover and uncover the answers to the questions that they are trying to answer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have some questions from the audience now. Also, if you want to ask your question anonymously, you can just send the question to me privately in the chat box. So the first question we have is, do you suggest that people get assessment with LC or Hogan or DISC before they get into coaching?
I think that depends on a whole lot of factors. And the main factor might be what you want to achieve with the coaching. These instruments can be helpful to meet certain aspirations, but they're not relevant to all aspirations. If my key question is, what do I want the next chapter in my life to look like? Then I'm not sure these instruments are very relevant. I coached one person recently who was having substantial marital strife and felt very distraught. And it was all about how to navigate this difficult period of life. I'm really not sure that those instruments would make much of a difference. But if it is about discovering strengths and shaping performance, they can be helpful. I think it is truly situational.
Okay, thank you, Thor. And the next question we have is, how can someone perform coaching effectively when it's done online, such as Zoom? What are the key differences in technique?
So let me maybe have a crack at that first, and then Thomas, very keen for you to contribute and build on this. So I do a fair amount of coaching by Zoom. In many cases, this is the only option these days. So we kind of need to make it work. And I find it to be effective. It can be just about as effective as being there in person, but it does require great discipline. I think when you are sitting with the coachee, you would never look at your phone or be distracted by someone else. You would close the door, you would make sure that you have a quiet environment. And these temptations may be slightly stronger in a virtual setting, in a Zoom environment. And I think both coach and coachee need to make this absolute commitment that I'm 100% there, getting an almost soundproof room, if you will, getting a neutral background so you don't have someone running around in the background, avoiding disturbing noises and so forth. There's also some practicalities. For example, it may be helpful to practice this little thing of looking at the camera rather than looking at the screen, because when you look at the camera, you give the impression of true eye contact. This can make a difference. There are little things like this that matter. It's more about small habits, I think, than about a true deep structural change. Another thing that I try to do quite systematically is in Zoom, for example, you can have a self view. I find that distracting. So I turn off the self view. So I'm not distracted by what I look like. Don't want any distractions there. And when I'm in person with another individual, I don't have to worry about the self view because I don't see myself. There's no mirror in the room typically, but on Zoom that is the case. So you do have this choice, the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner of your image on the screen, and you can say hide self view. So I think it's more about those little techniques. That's my experience. Thomas.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, fortunately, we are much more used to this virtual environment now than before due to the pandemic. And I think a good coaching session is much more about, how the coach is approaching the coachee, the silence, the questions, the support, the tension that is he or she is building, than the technicalities. So we need to be aware of the technicalities, but that is not what really makes a difference when it comes to the coaching.
Okay, thank you, Thomas and Thor. We actually have quite a bit of questions, so I'm glad everyone has a lot of questions to ask. The next question is, how would we know that the coachee has achieved what he or she wants? Is there an assessment tool that you would recommend?
I think Thomas touched a little bit on this when he went through the spectrum of different ways to make that assessment. And of course, one ask, one opportunity is just ask the coachee. Hopefully they know, right? But maybe there are also objective criteria. So I know we'll make the slides and the recording available here. Thomas shared a spectrum from the subjective to the objective. And I think checking in with the coachee is maybe the most important. But sometimes we do a kind of 360 in one way or another. So let's say that the coachee wants to develop a better bedside manner, wants to be more gracious with his or her people. We might go and speak with them. What change have you noticed in your leader over the past 6 months? And we can do that through interviews, either in person or by phone or Zoom or whatever, or we can do it in some kind of assessment, like LCP or some other 360.
Okay, next question.
Let me just add to
yeah, oh, yeah,
okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Let me just add a bit to that. What we also see from the LCP is that those dimensions that I mentioned are clearly linked to leadership effectiveness and business results. So if you do a 360 before and after and see a clear difference, improvement, that will translate most likely to better results for the business and organization. So there's the goal for the coachee himself or herself, and also the goal of the sponsoring company.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. The next question we have is, so in some cultures, coaching can have a negative connotation by the team, the company, or the leaders. How do you shift that sort of mindset?
So I first want to acknowledge that this is entirely true. And I have coachees who say, you cannot come to my office or to our environment, because if anyone discovers that I have a coach, that will just diminish me. I will lose credibility. So we need to go to a very confidential place and so forth. So that fear, I think, or that concern is very real. I'm not sure that I want to get on a mission to transform that mindset in the world globally. That's maybe a slightly too large task. But what we can do is we can help people reflect on the fact that many of the top athletic performers have coaches. In fact, I think they all do. And so if we use that analogy and people say, I'm good at my job, but I do believe I can get even better, or I'm reasonably confident, but I might gain deeper awareness. And if getting coaching like a top athlete can be helpful, then I can work with that. But I think it's one thing for the individual to make that call and then be pragmatic about it. It's another thing to convince your whole environment that this is not a huge defeat. It's not a huge act of vulnerability. And I think sometimes when this perception is strong, it is linked to one of the proposed definitions we had, or one of the proposed impressions of coaching that we had early on, that it's about fixing people and maybe fixing broken people even. And I think the world has come a long way. Coaching has a longer tradition in the US and in Europe than it does in parts of Asia, but it's developing rapidly also in Asia. So this is gradually declining, I think. Thomas, from a perspective in China, you're in mainland China now. What does it look like there?
I think this varies a lot from organization to organization. And I think also for a leader to say that I'm afraid to show that I have a coach, we might challenge that, saying, is this something you know that people will look differently at you, or do you think they will? And this comes back to our deepest beliefs and assumptions. And for you to assume this, what does it actually tell about you as a leader and your own authenticity and how you show up among your team and organization?
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is about the duration of coaching. So how long should one have coaching before it can have impact? How long should the coaching frequency be? Should one have coaching for a few years? And should there be changes in the approach?
Many questions at once. Well, there actually is some academic research on this, so we don't just need to base this on personal anecdotes and and personal impressions. So, perhaps slightly surprisingly, the academic research indicates that after the 6th session, you tend to get into diminishing returns. That doesn't mean there are no returns, but they are diminishing. The first 6 sessions are typically where the true turnaround happens. But of course, this depends hugely on the complexity of the issue that the coachee brings. I had one experience recently, which I thought was really gratifying and fun. I started to coach a relatively senior leader, and it was in mainland China. And the CEO and the head of HR had called me in initially and said, do you want to take on this case? Because this guy is brilliant, but there's huge churn in his group. People come and join. It costs us quite a lot to recruit people. They leave after 6 months, or they leave after 12 months. It's untenable. This is just unsustainable. So we have a brilliant individual who cannot hold on to people. And we've told this person that, you are fired, essentially, but we'll give you one last chance. If you want to engage in coaching, we want to give you that opportunity. And so you have a grace period of half a year. Not the best situation to enter coaching, but in that case, I had what I hoped was a candid conversation with this leader and asked, are you making this choice yourself? Do you want to engage in coaching, or are you being pushed into this? Of course, in some way, he was kind of being pushed, but he recognized the problem and he wanted to address it. After the 3rd session, I was called in by the CEO and the head of HR jointly, and they didn't quite know what to expect. Were they going to tell me that this was a waste and they wanted to cancel everything? But they started out the discussion by asking, where is your magic wand? You've had 3 sessions with this guy now, and he's completely changed. And I don't tell that story to boast of my amazing capabilities. This has more to do with the coachee than it has to do with the coach very often. In this case, this guy was very coachable. He was hungry, and he needed someone to give him feedback of a different kind and challenge him to ask different questions from the questions that he had been asking so far. And his environment hadn't been capable of asking those questions. So sometimes the change comes very quickly. So 3 sessions was the example here. The academic research says 6. I tend to spread coaching conversations out, so they're roughly once a month, can be every 3rd week or so, but most of the change takes place between sessions. It's not the magic in the session that makes a difference, it's what happens between sessions. So being very clear on what the coachee wants to work on, how they're going to assess that, how they're going to run experiments and start different patterns of behavior. They need to have time to practice that and then come back with an assessment of how is that changing things. Thomas?
I have been, both coaching and also a coachee when I was coached by you, Tor. And what I experienced then was that some changes can happen very quickly, so-called, low-hanging fruits. And then some changes takes much longer time. So there are different kind of changes, and they have different time horizons. We had a 6 sessions, and 6 months after our sessions ended, I was still seeing some changes and developments. So the effects can last much longer than the sessions themselves.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Tor, for sharing that story. It's quite good to know that depending on the complexity of what they are dealing with and what they want to achieve, the duration can vary. Maybe it'll take 3 sessions, maybe it'll take 6, or maybe it will take even more. The next question we have is, in an organization, when the coaching session is extended, should that be open to all or to be restricted to just high performers?
I think there's no should here. This has to be a choice on the part of the leadership in the organization. There is obviously a cost to coaching. There's the opportunity cost associated with the employees or the organization members not doing quote unquote real work, but sitting in a coaching session. And sometimes the coach comes with a fee. So it is an investment in people for sure. Many organizations take the view that it is our responsibility to develop the people that we hire. And in our organization, Agnus Consulting, it is obvious that we offer coaching to everyone because we believe that the return on investment is so very, very high. But this will vary depending on the kind of work that people do. Maybe in some cases, if you're at an assembly line, coaching will perhaps not change job performance that much. And if what you're focused on is job performance, and that is your emphasis, then I would not say that everyone should have coaching. I think this has to be lined up with strategy, what your value proposition is as an employer, the kind of culture you want to build in the organization, and a slew of other factors.
And we have another comment and question. This is from Sean. He says, this has been a session of great value. Thank you, everyone. What do you suggest as a means of continuous improvement for coaches? Sean reads a lot, but he has found this session to be more beneficial. What do you recommend?
Well, first, thank you, Sean, for the kind words here. We typically encourage all our people to enter into coaching supervision. So in the right kind of setting, if you're coaching by Zoom, for example, you can maybe record the session and then get feedback from a more experienced coach, or perhaps simply another coach who takes a different perspective. And I've sometimes found it quite grueling to have a seasoned coach go through a recording or maybe even a transcript of one of my sessions and ask in a very pointed manner, when you came to this point in the conversation, what options did you consider? Why did you ask this question? Where did you think this would lead? What were your ideas of other directions that you could have taken the conversation at that point? I think this can be a great awareness raising mechanism. Sometimes when we do face-to-face coaching, again, depending on the setting and so forth, we put a phone on a stand, and very quickly when you get into the coaching conversation, this just recedes from memory, the fact that the phone is there. People just forget about it completely. So even when it's in person, recording can be helpful. I offer all my people the opportunity to coach me, and then we systematically film it, or we record it, and then we go back and we go through it, and we assess it together. It's not about giving a grade, a pass, a fail, or some letter grade or numerical grade. It's about deepening awareness and jointly exploring opportunities. I think this is much, much more powerful than just reading, although reading is also great. There are also a number of programs, courses, and so forth, and we regularly attend those. Sean, if I were to give you one recommendation, it would be to look into More Time to Think. And I can send a reference separately, but you can also just Google the string More Time to Think, and you'll find some very valuable resources.
Thank you very much, Tor. We have about 1 minute left. I do have one more question on my side, so we'll continue the conversation, but if you need to go, feel free to dial out. Ina, thank you for your positive comments on the great insight in terms of coaching, which she finds personally beneficial. The other question I have is from a coachee's perspective, what else should one have aside from just having coaching sessions with a good coach, such as more reading, more reflection, more engagement, anything else that a coachee should build into their personal professional development?
Thomas, why don't you go first, and I'll build on that.
I think there are many things related to coaching. One of the most important things we do between sessions is concrete actions. So after a session, we may agree that, for the next meeting or next interaction with someone on your team, try to do this more or try to do this less. And to practice that, I think is a hugely valuable. And that is, as Tor said, a lot of the things that are happening between sessions is where you are actually developing yourself. Reading is of course very valuable, and also to have time to reflect. I found that really difficult in busy times, but the more busy you are, the more time you actually need to be sitting by yourself and reflect on what is actually happening, reflecting on the day that you have been through, and reflecting on the next day that you will be starting on. So time to reflect, I think, is also really important in the journey of developing yourself.
I would maybe mention 3 factors. I do think mentoring has a role that can be valuable. It's a complement. I do think sponsorship is important. Is there someone in your context or in your organization that opens up opportunities for you, gives you challenges, gives you new opportunities to engage? And can you organize some kind of job rotation or some way that you can take on new challenges so you can get a greater diversity of experiences? I think all of these contribute to growth in various ways.
So another comment, great suggestions on books and YouTube references. Do you have any suggestions on good audios on coaching?
I don't personally. That's just not my channel. I'm sure there are, podcasts of various kinds. Really not my domain.
Not me either. But yeah, they are. I'm sure they are out there.
Maybe this is an opportunity for you, Tor, Thomas, to start a podcast.
Yeah, well, we'll consider that challenge.
Maybe,
thank you, Jennifer.
Maybe.
Yes, I think you already have a fan base here today, so you'll have some subscribers immediately, including myself.
Thank you.
Okay. So if there are no more questions from the audience, I will wrap up the session. So afterwards, in the next 1 or 2 days, I will send you a follow-up email, which will include a copy of the presentation, as well as Tor and Thomas's contact details. So if you have any follow-up inquiries, you may reach out to them directly. So thank you, Thomas and Tor, for your time and sharing your expertise. And thank you to all the participants that joined us today. Have a great evening, and then hope to catch you at the next webinar.
Thank you for good questions and comments.
Jennifer.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.